water didn't splash when my flashlight hit it. It shivered like a living thing, disturbed in its sleep. Most men who take jobs like mine never see anything worth remembering. I was one of those men, until the morning they handed me the Cinder Gap assignment. My name is Elias Vance. I am a structural auditor for a federal contracting firm out of Knoxville, Tennessee. My work is not glamorous. I walk through old buildings. I tap on walls. I write numbers in columns. And I go home. I have been doing this for 22 years. I have walked through condemned hospitals, shuttered textile mills, flooded railway depots smelling of coal and old iron, and not once did I feel anything I could not explain. Cinder Gap was different. Cinder Gap sits in a narrow fold of the southern Appalachians, the kind of valley that doesn't appear on commercial maps unless you know to look for it. The mountains press in close from both sides, like two old hands cupped around something they don't want you to see. The road leading in is State Route 771, a single crumbling lane, overrun at its edges by rhododendron and ironweed, that follows a creek called Bone Run for 11 miles. I drove out on a Tuesday in late October. The sky was the color of old pewter. The leaves on the hardwoods were long past their color, hanging now as dark and leathery things, like pieces of skin that had forgotten to fall. A private energy consortium called Meridian Geothermal had acquired a decommissioned federal facility in Cinder Gap, a site under lock and chain since the mid-1950s. And before they could begin their new turbine installation, the law required a structural integrity assessment. That was me. I should have known something was wrong when my phone lost signal on the turn-off Highway 19. Not a gradual fade, a clean cut, like someone throwing a switch. I had been told about this in the briefing. Cinder Gap sits inside a ferrous anomaly, a deep vein of magnetite-rich granite running through the bedrock, creating a natural electromagnetic dampening effect across the whole valley. Electronics behave strangely in there. Compasses spin. Radio frequencies collapse into each other. The locals have another name for it. They call it the Silent Zone. I reached the facility gate just after 9 in the morning. The fence was heavy gauge chain link, topped with barbed wire gone orange-brown in the mountain damp. A newer padlock hung on the gate latch, shining and incongruous against all that rust. I punched in the access code. The lock clicked open. I pushed through. The facility itself was set back perhaps 200 yards, down a gravel track the forest had been slowly reclaiming for decades. The rhododendron on either side had grown so dense that their bare winter branches interlocked overhead like fingers knitting together. Even in the gray October light, it was darker in there than it should have been. I drove slow. The quiet was not the clean, empty kind. It was the kind where things go quiet because something is listening. The main building was long and low, poured concrete and dark brick, built in a severe utilitarian style the federal government favored in the late 1940s. 2 stories, flat roof, narrow windows spaced at regular intervals, most of them intact behind wire-reinforced glass. Vandals hadn't found Cinder Gap, or perhaps they had found it and decided they preferred to stay on the road. Even from the entrance apron I could smell it. Ozone. Not the sharp, clean bite of a summer storm. Something older. A deep, acrid sweetness, like the air inside an old electrical substation, like the smell of something that has been running continuously for a very long time. The interior was largely as expected, a central corridor running the length of the structure, administrative offices stripped down to bare concrete and dust. Old linoleum buckled in long, curling strips. Drop ceilings collapsed in several rooms, leaving conduit and trunking hanging like exposed ribs. I worked room by room. That is what I do. It was late afternoon when I found the door at the end of the eastern corridor. It was not on my floor plan. The door was heavy steel with industrial hinges, ordinary enough at first glance, but the frame was bordered on all 4 sides with thick, dark material bolted into the concrete at 6-inch intervals. Lead sheeting, perhaps half an inch thick. I knew it by the dull blue-gray color and the way it absorbed my flashlight beam rather than reflecting it. The second thing I noticed was harder to explain. The door was warm, not the way a surface gets from sunlight, warm the way a living thing is warm. I pressed my palm against the steel and felt a vibration, slow, regular, rhythmic, not mechanical exactly, more like a heartbeat. The door was not locked. I have thought about that many times since. It opened inward with a low, sustained groan, and beyond it was a staircase descending into the earth. Concrete steps, iron railing, a string of old industrial bulkhead lights along the wall, all of them dark and frosted with mineral deposit. The smell of ozone intensified immediately, and with it something new, cold and mineral and faintly sweet, the way a deep well smells when you lean over its edge in summer. I descended. The lower corridor ran perpendicular to the building above. The architecture here was different, older. The concrete was darker, almost black in places. The ceiling was low. The lead lining continued here, entire sections of wall clad in it, and the effect was of a space that had been very deliberately sealed from the world above. And then I saw the light, low, faint, bleeding through the mortar joints of the far wall, a soft, cold blue, not quite bioluminescent, not quite electrical, something between the two. The heartbeat thumping I had felt through the door above was stronger down here. I could feel it through the soles of my boots, rising and falling in a rhythm that my own pulse embarrassingly began to match. The blue light came from a second door set into the lead-clad wall at the corridor's end. This door was also steel, also warm. Around its edges, the cold blue leaked through in thin, trembling lines. Mounted beside the door on a stamped aluminum placard were three things. The first was a symbol I recognized from my federal training, the trefoil. 3 interlocking arcs arranged in a circle, the international symbol for ionizing radiation. The second was a date, 1947. The third was a designation. It read, Project Glocke, Schweres Wasserreaktor, Zone Alpha. I knew enough German to parse it. Bell Project, Heavy Water Reactor, Zone Alpha. My hand had stopped moving toward the door handle. My feet had stopped moving entirely. I stood in the dark for a long time, watching the blue light breathe. I want to tell you what I knew at that moment, and what I only learned later from the documents inside. What I knew. Die Glocke, the bell, was a matter of historical record, a Nazi experimental device, something to do with exotic physics, unconventional propulsion. Most serious historians regarded it as wartime mythology. What I learned later was that some of the scientists involved had not been tried at Nuremberg. They had come here instead. Operation Paperclip had brought them over quietly in the early years of the Cold War. Their expertise was considered too valuable to waste on justice. The federal government had given them new names, new identities, and a concrete vault beneath a mountain in the Appalachians. They had kept working. I opened the door. The room beyond was vast, far larger than the building above suggested was possible, extending deep into the mountain bedrock. The ceiling rose 40 feet. The walls curved inward toward the top, giving the space the shape of an enormous inverted bowl. And at its center, the bell, cylindrical, perhaps 12 feet in diameter and 15 feet tall, fabricated from a metal I could not identify, dark and smooth-surfaced, with concentric rings and conduit attachments spiraling up its exterior like the threads of an enormous screw. Connected by thick cable and copper piping to a surrounding constellation of equipment spreading across the floor like the roots of a great tree. Instrument banks, valve assemblies, pressure gauges, their needles still trembling, and running beneath everything, sunk into channels in the concrete floor, pipes, hundreds of them, carrying heavy water, deuterium oxide, the moderating fluid that keeps a certain class of nuclear reaction stable. The heartbeat I had been feeling was the pumping of those pipes. The blue light came from the bell itself, a cold, wavering luminescence pressing against the seams of the device, leaking out in threads and halos. Cherenkov radiation, I would later understand. The glow produced when charged particles move through a medium faster than light can travel through that same medium. A sign of something nuclear, something still active. I stood in the enormous dark of that chamber, with the blue light trembling across my face, and the heartbeat of the water pumps resonating up through my feet and into my bones. And I had the very quiet, very terrible feeling that the bell was looking back. There were filing cabinets along the eastern wall, 6 of them, olive drab. The drawers were not locked. The files were written in German mostly, but some had been translated into English in small, precise handwriting, clipped to the originals with rusted paper clips. Scientific handwriting. I read what I could. The program had begun in 1948. 6 scientists under classified orders. Their work was not weapons research, or not primarily. The project was something stranger, sitting at the edges of physics as it was then understood. They were attempting to suspend biological matter in a state of molecular stasis, using the heavy water as a medium, using the bell's radiation field as a preserving mechanism, a cold fire that held every atom precisely in place, not freezing, not cryogenics, something altogether different, something that required a live subject. The files became harder to read past a certain point. The dates grew erratic, the handwriting changed, grew trembling and desperate. The last translated entry was dated September of 1953. It read, "The process is stable. Subject remains in full suspension. Vital markers indeterminate but present. Molecular coherence is maintained by continuous field exposure. Interruption of field will initiate gradual reversal. Estimated reversal time upon interruption, 72 to 96 hours. Subject is not unconscious. He is waiting. Below that, in a different, hastier hand, do not interrupt the field. Do not interrupt the pumps. He hears everything. I turned back to the bell. I had not noticed the window before. A seam in the bell's surface I had taken for a structural joint, which was, I now understood, a small rectangle of glass so thick it had appeared solid in the blue light. A face behind the glass, a man's face, eyes closed, head slightly tilted, mouth barely parted. His skin was the color of old candle wax. His hair floated around his head the slow, patient way that hair moves underwater. He was suspended in something with the heaviness and stillness of water, but the blue-lit luminescence of something that had never existed in any natural state. He was waiting, just as the file had said. And then I heard it, above me, distant, vibrating down through 40 feet of mountain rock and concrete. The sound of Meridian Geothermal's new turbines coming online. New current flooding through old conduit, finding its way down through 70-year-old copper and corroded junction boxes into the lower wing, into the bell's power system. The blue light intensified. The heartbeat of the pumps accelerated, and the face behind the glass, it was not a sudden thing. Nothing about any of this was sudden. The movement was the movement of a man in deep underwater sleep, barely perceptible, the smallest possible shift. The way a sleeper's eye will tremble beneath the lid when a dream reaches its turning point. But it was movement. After 80 years of suspension, something in the bell had heard the turbines, had felt the new current, had recognized the electrical signature of the system waking up. I backed away from the window. I did not run, not from bravery. It was more that the atmosphere of that place did not permit running. The slow heartbeat of the pumps, the cold blue light, the pressurized quiet of the lead-lined walls, all of it kept me in the same slow, dreamlike rhythm the chamber itself operated on. I backed away slowly, and as I did, I looked at his face one last time. His eyes were still closed, but his lips had moved, not in speech, or not that I could see from my distance, more like the lips of a man who is dreaming, and in the dream has just said something very important to someone standing very close. I found the main power conduit for the lower wing halfway up the staircase. An old junction panel, its cover hanging open on one hinge. The new orange cable that Meridian's team had run fed directly into it from above. I pulled the breaker. The cable went dead. Below me, the heartbeat of the pump slowed. The blue light dimmed. I climbed the rest of the stairs and walked back through the dark main corridor and out the front door into the cold October evening. I sat in my truck for a long time. I did not write anything in my log. I simply sat and listened to the wind move through the ironweed at the edge of the gravel, and thought about a man who had been sleeping in cold blue light since 1953, and what it would feel like after 80 years of waiting in the dark to feel the lights come back on. I filed a report with the Federal Historic Preservation Office. I cited the radiation hazard, the undisclosed structural elements. I recommended a full regulatory review before any Meridian development could proceed. I don't know what happened after that. Men like me file reports. Other men decide what to do with them. I drove out of Cinder Gap the following morning. The road along Bone Run felt longer on the way out. The rhododendron tunnel was darker. The creek sounded lower in its bed. My phone came back to life as I turned onto Highway 19. 17 missed calls, 4 voicemails, 3 from my office, 1 from a number I did not recognize, a Knoxville area code, no name attached. I listened to the first 3 voicemails. I have not listened to the 4th. What I keep coming back to, what I cannot stop thinking about in the quiet hours, is not the bell, not the blue light, not even the face behind the glass. It is the last line of that translated file entry. He hears everything. Because the Meridian turbines were not silent when they came online. They shook the building. They sent current crackling down 70-year-old wire. They were loud in the way that only large machines are loud. Felt as much as heard. A vibration that moved through rock and soil and concrete and bone. And somewhere below the floor of that facility, in a lead-lined room beneath a mountain in the silent zone, a man who had been waiting in heavy water since 1953 heard them. And I pulled that breaker, and the lights went out again. And somewhere in the still blue dark of Zone Alpha, something that had almost finished waking up began once more to wait. Sleep well.